Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first plenary session, which is on land management. We have a very interesting panel today, so I will start by introducing the chair of the session, and then we can move forward on this. The chair and moderator of the session is Dr. O.P. Agarwal. Dr. Agarwal is a retired IAS officer. He's currently the executive director of the Indian School for Business. For nearly 30 years, Dr. Agarwal worked and headed the Urban Transport Division within the Ministry of Urban Development and was later a senior urban transport specialist at the World Bank. In the past, he has served as the managing director of the Urban Mass Transit Company India, which develops sustainable urban mobility solutions. He is also a key author of the NUTP, which is the National Urban Transport Policy. I will ask him to please open the session. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Ajit. And good morning to everyone. The word smart cities, or the phrase smart cities, really become the buzzword across the country. And everything seems to have become smart with this idea of the smart cities. So you have smart mobility, you have smart power, you have smart water, you have lots of smart things going around. But frankly, I can't imagine anything being more important for the country now than to look after its cities and make sure the cities are prepared well for this kind of a tsunami that I think is going to happen very soon. So it's high time we started looking after our cities and preparing for this to happen, and I think it's in this context that the idea of the smart cities is perhaps one of the most important that this country is gearing up for. As we heard in the previous session, there is some doubt or some definitional problem with what is a smart city. I frankly wouldn't like to get into that kind of a thing, but to my mind, a smart city is one that knows how to use its resources smartly. Whether it's its land, whether it's the energy, whether it's the water, whether it's the electricity, whether it can use these resources smartly so that it benefits the largest section of the population. There's some who feel that deployment of IT makes a city smart. I frankly think that deployment of IT has an objective. If the objective is to use these resources efficiently, that's a good objective. Merely deploying IT is not the solution or not the goal of a smart city. Amongst all these resources that it needs to use well, I think the most important is land. Land is not something that you can create, it's finite, it doesn't grow. Land is something which serves many purposes. I think good land management leads to good energy management, leads to good transport management, leads to good water management, leads to good environment, leads to good so many other things. So land management becomes critical. The other important thing about land is we talk about cities being sustainable. One of the elements of that sustainability is financial sustainability. Cities must also be financially sustainable. They can't keep looking to government for subsidies year after year. And to my mind, one of the biggest resources, financial resources, that a city could tap is its land. Land is very valuable, and many countries around the world have really looked at using land as a resource for meeting their financing needs. Let me not go too much beyond that. We have some very eminent speakers. I'll introduce them one by one, but before that, I would call upon Rajit to make a brief background presentation, a short background presentation. She introduced me, so I think it's my job to introduce her. Rajit is the Manager for Regional Planning and Economics in the Embark India office. She's held key responsibilities in the past in regional plans, master plans, detailed design, etc. Rajit.
Thank you, sir. As Mr. Dr. O.P. Agarwal and the Minister, Nitin Gadkari, spoke about, land is definitely a very live topic today because of the amendments to the acts and things like that. So definitely a very visceral topic, but some things to understand in land. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah. One, it is limited by nature. It is sort of its natural element to be limited, but increasing pressures and demand for land is continuing, especially in urban areas. In the context of smart cities, definitely we need smart land management as well. And procuring land for public purposes in efficient yet equitable ways is definitely going to underpin the Smart Cities program. So if you're wondering why do we need land in cities, we probably know T3 terminal in Delhi, we know T 2 in Mumbai, a completely new airport in Bangalore. All of these facilities require land. So facility expansion, urban renewal, adding in new infrastructure, urban expansion, cities themselves need to grow, and new developments are coming up in peripheries altogether, greenfield expansion. You also have urban reuse sometimes. You have urban redevelopment when you want to provide a better quality of housing. You have urban retrofitting like metro corridors, BRT systems, all of these require land. So how do states and local areas deal with land today? We have 284 legislations as of today on land in India. And this is because states, like the center, can continue to legislate on land. This is because you have land as a subject in both the concurrent list and the state list as well. And because of this, what you see in terms of discourse on land today is actually a huge history behind it. Just as the historical provinces, erstwhile provinces that we had continue to legislate on land, you continue to have that in cities today. So the discourse is really sort of a sum total of historic legislation, constitutional powers, court rulings that determine what the amendments can be, and varied local history and culture. Now, a variety of innovative mechanisms have resulted because of this, because of the diversity we have across the country. At Embark India, we are actually looking at a work area called land management, where we're trying to figure out innovative mechanisms to deal with land. And that is why we are very interested ourselves to see how this panel goes, because we have different questions ourselves. For example, the type of land required could be greenfield, redevelopment, renewal, retrofitting, or even a combination of all of these. The stakeholders present are many, whether it's private, government, public-private partnerships, owners themselves develop land sometimes. You have feasibility, pre-feasibility, what kind of impact assessment should be done, what should be done to project-affected people. So all of these questions all arising in the process of land management in India. Definitely we have interesting mechanisms. Through the Land Acquisition Act, you have bulk acquisition. Through land assembly approaches like readjustment, town planning schemes, guided urban development, transfer of development rights, how do you deal with brownfield, greenfield, all of these questions. So as we, as an organization, are looking to develop better decision-making tools for government agencies, we look forward to what the session has to present on this. I will leave a slide on some key questions that we're presenting to the panelists, and they will address these as part of their presentation. First and foremost, how do state and local land procurement and development mechanisms work? What are the advantages and disadvantages? What are the institutional structures, partnerships, stakeholder participation? What legislation helps them do this at state levels? There's a new act at the center. It has caught the imagination of the nation today. Who hasn't asked a question on land or had an opinion on land today in the country? So what benefits and constraints have come because of the new act, especially related to local mechanisms? Can private players be integrated in terms of land development, procurement, and definitely helping in urban development of the country? What learnings can these mechanisms provide to smart cities? This is just a quick background. I will give it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajit. Naya Raipur is, in the recent past, appears to me to be one of the first few greenfield capital cities coming up in the country. Now we have Mr. S.S. Bajaj. I've known him for a long time. He's from the Indian Forest Service, 1988 batch of the Forest Service, but has moved away from his forest responsibilities and gone much more into the town planning responsibility. He's the Director of Town and Country Planning for the new Chhattisgarh state, also the Vice Chairman of the Naya Raipur Development Authority. NRDA was tasked with the work of developing the new capital, and although NRDA was tasked with it, I know that Mr. Bajaj has done most of that work. And he will talk to us about consensus building and land procurement in Naya Raipur. 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir. Respected chairs and ladies and gentlemen. As you are briefed, Naya Raipur is the capital of the new state Chhattisgarh, which was created in the year 2000. And I'll tell you one of the magnitude of the land involved in the building of the new capital. We have procured around 5,000 hectares of land through negotiation by purchase, 655 hectares of land through Land Acquisition Act. We had around 2,800 hectares of government land which was transferred to the authority. So total we have around 8,500 hectare land. And this process was started in the year 2006. And in 8 or 9 years, we have procured around 8,500 hectares of land. I'll tell you the, the vision behind making the new capital city. We had the objective in mind that the city would be a modern, but at the same time it will be a green and smart city. We will conserve the environment, will use the non-conventional energy as much as possible, and the city would be designed for users-friendly, the non-motorized transport, the public bus transport, and other public mode of transport would be encouraged. And lastly, it will have a sense of security amongst the citizens, especially the women, children, and the physically challenged people. This is the setting of Naya Raipur. It is around 20 kilometers from the existing Raipur city, which was declared as the capital of the Chhattisgarh. There is a history how this site was selected. I'll not go into detail, but this is well connected by the national highways. There is an airport in between Raipur and Naya Raipur. You can see the green one is the airport. And this is also being connected by railways through the Raipur-Visakhapatnam existing railway link. And now we are also implementing the BRTS system in Naya Raipur, which will connect Raipur, Naya Raipur, as well as within Naya Raipur. So you see the planning area of Naya Raipur, it's around 240 square kilometer total. The core area is 80 square kilometer, which is the area where we are putting all the infrastructure and developing in phase 1. And layer 2 is the peripheral area. We are controlling the development. It's around 130 square kilometer. And layer 3 is the airport expansion area, airport zone, which is around 12 square kilometer. When we started thinking and planning the city, we had many models in mind how to develop this area. We had the conventional system of preparing the master plan and let the people develop the area. The second was to use the government land for making the government offices, and rest the landowners should develop the area. The third was the land pooling scheme, by which we allowed some of the developed plots back to the landowners. And the fourth is the total development control, where we have all the land in hand and we develop as per the master plan. Since this was the greenfield city, so the government decided that we'll have the land, the total land in layer 1, the layer 1 which is the phase 1 of the development, and layer 2 will be kept as it is, and we will formulate some of the planning and development guidelines and let the private people develop within the restricted control regulations. So to start with, we try to build a consensus amongst the people who have the land in the area, so that we can procure them, we can acquire them. See, acquiring and procuring are two different terminology. We have in the Act the kind of mechanism by which we can negotiate with the farmers, we can build a consensus, and we can procure the land, or we can acquire the land. So we had to explain to the people the benefit of the project. Once the project is there, they will be the first citizen of the new capital. They will have all the employment opportunities in the new cities. They will retain their houses in the existing villages, and their social and economic benefits will be, that will come to the local people. To identify the area, we had to survey the area, whether the area is irrigated, the land is irrigated, non-irrigated, barren land. no residents or no houses are to be disturbed from the area. And we collected all the data regarding the land records, the land availability, the land suitability, the soil type. And then we started negotiating dialogue, negotiating with the people. This is how we started negotiating with the people to convince them that the project is in their benefit, and if the land is given to the authority by mutual consent, the area will be developed as a new city. And we started negotiating with the people. We arrived at some consensus, the rehabilitation package, the compensation package. And by the end of 2007, when we had our master plan in place, we started purchasing land from the farmers. To arrive at the rate, because the rate is the issue, that is the basic issue, at what rate the land should be procured or they acquired. So we had a committee. In committee, the government side was also there, the public representative also there. We had lot of sitting, not only in the office room, but also in the villages. So we sat, we discussed what is the existing rate, what would be the future rates, and what should be the fair compensation so that people at large are happy. So this committee discussed twice and thrice. We arrived at some rate that was not very acceptable to the people. So the people decided that this task should be given. This task should be given to the government. They should decide the rate which is acceptable to most of the people. The Chief Minister himself called the meeting with the farmers, with the local village representative, and had a long discussion. And finally, we concluded that ₹6 lakh per acre at the time of, in the year 2006 would be the rate at which the NRDA will procure the land. See, we have 41 villages in the planning area. The different villages have different land values. But we decided that we'll procure at only one price, which is around 2 to 3 times more than the prevailing market rate. This is just to ensure that there is no hanky-panky in the procurement. The procurement is transparent and everyone gets a fair price. So we had a lot of discussion with the people. The CM had a discussion with the farmers, and you can see the procurement procurement sizes. In 2006-07, we started the procurement. 2007-08 was the largest procurement year. We procured around 1,937 hectares of the land, and the process we followed is we invited the application from the farmers whosoever is willing to sell the land to NRDA, and in a format. They were given certain digital number, 4-digit number, that is the registration number. Then notice was published in the newspaper. If anyone has any objections, then we made inquiry whether there is any litigation of the land is irrigated or non-irrigated. And after confirming all the legal aspects, we entered into the sale deed with the farmers. And we did not ask the farmer to come to the registration office. Rather, we organized a camp in the village itself where the farmers and the people from Naya Raipur Development Authority, they enter into a sale deed. And on the same day, the check was given to the local farmers, and the mutation was done. Along with the compensation, we also formulated a rehabilitation policy. The compensation was around 2 to 3 times of the prevailing market rates, and as and when we progressed further, we also gave them 5%, 10%, 20% additional compensation. Third was if they go and purchase land anywhere in the state, there will not be a stamp duty on the sale of any agricultural land. This impact is around 10% of the land value, because the stamp duty is around 10%. And in 2012-13, there was a demand from the people that they have lost their agricultural income. So the government decided they will be paid annuity of rupees 15,000 per acre up to 2030-31. That is our planning period. With the increase of 750 rupees per annum per year. This policy or this package is before the new Land Acquisition Act, where there is a provision in the Land Acquisition Act that the annuity will also be given to the people who are affected by the land acquisition. And apart from the compensation and the annuity, they will also be given plots according to the size of the land they have sold to Naya Raipur Development Authority. And in the village, we are constructing the mini markets. In the mini markets, the commercial shops are also being given to these people. So these are the rehabilitation packages apart from the compensation. We have already paid the annuity in 2012-13 and 13-14. There is only one village which we have relocated to a new site. Rest of the villages are still there. So we have made a new colony, 400 houses for them, and these houses were given free of cost to them, apart from the compensation for their existing houses. And the area of the land was same to what they had in their original village. So there were threefold compensation. One is the land for land, second is the compensation for their existing house, whether it's kacha or pakka, and third is the new houses free of cost to them. Apart from this village, we have around 11 more villages in the planning area. So we are developing these villages so that their infrastructure, social or physical, are integrated with the Naya Raipur. For that, we have prepared a village development plan, and the village development plan only, we are giving them the plots, developed plots, according to the parcel of the land they have given to Naya Raipur. We are also providing training so that the skills are developed, and they are also absorbed in some of the activities which are the construction activities, plumbing, also firefighting, or masons, or a carpenter, or even in the housekeeping, they have been trained and they have been absorbed in some of the Naya Raipur projects. These are some of the photographs. So you can see the roads. This is the water treatment plant. It's underground electricity infrastructure. This is the solar energy plant. It's a 1.1 megawatt solar energy. This is the capital complex. It's a new Mantralaya building. And this is the overview of a capital complex. You can see the directorates and the Mantralaya. And it's the airport, new airport. And these are some of the residential colonies which are coming up. So far, we have developed around 2,000 hectares of the land, and there are more than 8 to 10,000 houses already built. A lot of projects already coming up in Naya Raipur, including the national and international level universities like IIM, Triple IT, Law University, and then we have the government and semi-government organizations, armies, BSF, CRPF, apart from the residential and commercial activities. These are the footprints of what have already been developed in Naya Raipur in the last 6 to 7 years. Thank you very much.
I think we'll finish all the presentations and then take some questions from the audience. Now, this is fascinating. More than half the land you've got through mutual consent. And even going to the extent of paying 3 times the government rate. I mean, these are ways in which farmers are persuaded that contributing the land is of value to them and helping the city to come up, and yet getting a good rehabilitation package for them. The next speaker is Mr. Paresh Sharma, who is the Chief Town Planning Officer for the state of Gujarat. Gujarat has taken up a number of innovative DPTP mechanisms, so the development plan, town planning scheme, under which land is being taken up for effective management of the new cities that are coming up. And Mr. Sharma will talk about these. Specifically, it's the Gujarat land pooling scheme that he'll be talking about. Mr. Sharma.
Respected Chairperson and distinguished panelists and friends. Town planning Gujarat we refer as tool for planned, fair, equitable and urban development. That is the key on which we have been successful and we have been practicing since many years. Firstly, what is the planning regime in Gujarat? We laissez-faire, no control in development. This is there in many cities, across, not in Gujarat, but other states also. Then the second is some process of control, land use control and development regulations, building control mechanisms are adopted. But even though this is not successful, many cities of Gujarat has this process where land pooling is not adopted. Third is what we refer is in case of Raipur or other new cities. Gandhinagar was also developed on similar lines. Land acquisition first, and since 1997, a development plan also is there for which takes care of land use and development control regulations. This is another model which presently, many states, new cities which are taken up by either Raipur or other states. Then fourth mechanism is private townships. 2009, we adopted a new policy of township policy, wherein private sector development, private stakeholders are invited, and they acquire land, develop through a controlled mechanism, and similar to what we can call is a land acquired by government and developed, or a private sector acquiring 100 hectares or something around 200 hectares of land and developing. In this, we could able to achieve some progress, but not much more. This development plan and TP scheme mechanism, this is mostly in many parts of the state has been adopted. Many cities, we have practiced this since very long time. And recent addition is local area plan. Like in Ahmedabad, everyone knows BRTS is one of the key transport mechanisms, and further rail is going to come. All areas adjacent to these transport corridors has a TOZ, trans-oriented development, and that requires high density. We are looking forward to get more land in public domain through local area plans. This is a new addition, this we added in mechanism. Now, what do we do? First, the Town Planning Act has 3-tier procedures. One is development plan, macro level planning, where new areas are added, zone density is controlled, city level road network infrastructure is designated. Then micro level planning, town planning schemes, neighborhood level infrastructure is there. Also, the city level road networks are incorporated. One can say that we are implementing the development plan proposals of city level infrastructure through TP schemes. Then second is improving of the efficiency and access to individual land parcels, that is reconstitution, appropriation of land holdings, that is through TP scheme. Then land availability for social and physical infrastructure like housing, schools, and other services. And then financing of neighborhoods level infrastructure, that is through incremental contribution. And the last is retrofitting local area plan. These are the total regime. Now, town planning regime in Gujarat is as old as 100 years. We will be completing 100 years this year. 1915, this act came into existence. Then 1925, the first TP scheme came into process. Then 54, we amended the act, brought in the concept of development plan, land use controls. Then 1960, the first development plan was prepared, and then 1976, the Town Planning Act, present act of Gujarat, has come into existence. Then later on, the success story also relates to as and when we required amendments to deal in with the situation. We have amended the act in 95, 99, 2001, and lastly in 2014 also. We keep on improving the act. That is one of the positive aspects of the government also. This we consider as a sovereign tool backed by law and following principles of cooperative participation. I mean, I would stress on cooperative participation, which is the key story to success of land pooling in Gujarat. Now, I mean, this I have already explained. Promote efficient, sustainable, equitable land development. Planned and sustainable growth through cooperative public participation. We take this tool. This is a tool what we refer. It is not a plan or something which is a regime which can be applicable only in one areas. We have tried it in greenfield areas, brownfield areas, revitalization of downtown areas, and creation of an infrastructure also. This is first TP scheme prepared by Britishers in 1925. Other TP schemes which have come up in Ahmedabad and other parts of the state. 1915 Act, this is the scheme which was there in 1946. Now, what did we do in 100 years? I mean, earlier we used to have TP schemes, downplaying schemes of the size of 100 hectares, which was considered to be a manageable unit of development. Now, with the passage of time, it has gone to 3,000 hectares also. You can imagine the flexibility of the tool, which is there from 100 hectares to 3,000 hectares. Then, over a period of time, we are taking away land 25 to 50%. Several states have adopted the procedure of having 100% land acquisition, 75% land acquisitions. Here we are restricting land acquisition to the extent of 25 to 50%. Yes, in a few cases we have gone to a larger level also, but those are splinter examples, not much emphasis. That does not have any concern about it. And 50 to 75% land is given to the original owners in return. And most important is that the landowners are consulted at various stages during the conversion, during the land consolidation or land readjustment. And the gains through this entire procedure, either by way of improvisation, land efficiency, or providing development in this replanning or creation of infrastructure, that is shared by both the local authority and the owners. This is the story from 2020, 1930 till 2000. I have data up till 2010 only, which says that most of the schemes which have come up, I mean 70 to 80% of the schemes have come up from 1990 to 2010, last 15 years, 15-20 years. That's where we did much more work. And I would say that here I mentioned only Ahmedabad, but Ahmedabad, Surat, and maybe Rajkot also, they have in most of the areas are developed through TP schemes. We have not acquired much land, I mean, not to the extent of 5 to 6% also beyond this, other than the TP schemes. Now, what could we achieve? This is the data of last 5 years. Roads and circulation spaces, almost 180 square kilometers of area which we could take away. We could provide for roads and circulation. Weaker section housing, 12 square kilometers. This is again data of 2010. Then land for infrastructure financing, I mean, which was one of the key issues. Now we are dealing with other mechanisms also for infrastructure financing. That is, we got something around 18 square kilometers land, and then for open spaces, 12 square kilometers. Majority of the housing projects which are undertaken by the local governments presently are on land which are acquired through TP schemes. Now, what is a simplified version? This is the farms which are there, land holdings. What is the infrastructure which is to be laid out, that is marked on those areas. Then the deduction is calculated, like if 25% is required for that area, that a tabulation is being made, statement is made, what is the deduction, what is the final plots, the red figures which are, the red parcels which would be coming up. This is the areas which are marked out, final plot areas. Then the values are being calculated. what is the what is the total area lost by each person. The value is compensation has been calculated. Then the final increment what has been calculated for each parcel, and that is been shared by 50%. The owner has to share it with the, and the net result is the owner gains much more than what he is sharing with the, he is losing the land, the value. This is, now we take up a real example. This is the survey numbers, the land parcels were there, they were surveyed, the boundaries been identified, the revenue records are been assessed, a statement is created of revenue records, infrastructure, this road network has been planned out, infrastructure requirements, whatever is there required for that area. I mean, this, I would stress that this varies from city to city and different locations within the city also. Like we have a flexibility up to 50% we can take away the land for infrastructure. Now, in this case, in this particular scheme, it was 30% which was taken up. Then the final plots are being delineated. The value in compensation is calculated and the betterment is tabulated. Now, after this is being drafted out by the authority, the owners of that area are consulted. At the time of drafting of the scheme, the objections are invited by the authorities. Then demarcation is being laid down on site. Consultation by a quasi-judicial officer appointed by the government, because the entire land pooling project is being prepared by the local government, which is one of the beneficiaries. That's why quasi-judicial officer is appointed by the government, like we do it in case of Land Acquisition Act. Officer has been appointed and he decides the compensation. Land has been demarcated, I mean final plots are being demarcated, betterment levies are calculated, and this way the entire scheme is been prepared. Now, what could we do over a period of time? This was the first experience of having, say, city infrastructure, that is Sardar Patel Ring Road of Ahmedabad of 76 kilometers length and 60 meters wide. 95% of that land was taken away through this mechanism, and recently a 26 kilometer stretch in Surat also is, I mean, the land is taken by the TP scheme mechanism. The Sardar Patel Ring Road is, I mean, completed. It is in this thing. People are using it since almost 7, 8 to 10 years. Then in case of Ahmedabad, Ahmedabad has less gardens. So we tried to have one of the TP schemes, land pooling scheme of 1250 hectares, where a 50 per hectare garden was is to be created. This is in planning process. Plan is prepared. It is with the quasi-judicial officer. We'll carve out a huge parcel of land in between. These are small pockets where neighborhood level services in Ahmedabad are provided through TP schemes. Then again, yeah, unauthorized colonies. I mean, in East Ahmedabad, there are, as well in other states also, there are large-scale unauthorized colonies where city level infrastructure at least is needed. Some some road circulation spaces are there. That similar is there in Ahmedabad. This scheme was prepared for the purpose of roads and some open spaces wherever is available. Then the classic example of rebuilding the towns after earthquake was Bhuj, Bachau, Rapar and Anjar. They were devastated, 100% this thing. Collapse was there in these towns. I mean, 100% was in Bachau, but other this thing, there were hard collapse. The debris were removed. In case the land parcels were, TP scheme was carved out in the downtown area. The yellow color in between, which shows this is the this is the most dense area, 26 hectares of the small pocket in between, and where 3,000 owners were there. You can, the density was, yeah, I'll just be 5 minutes. This is there, the replanning was done, and this is 100% implemented. Then social infrastructure which has been created. Now, other classic examples of land consolidation. Recently, this scheme of 2,000 hectares is done in Baroda, where 65 hectares of core area for employment generation, IT parks or financial hub would be created over there. That was the objective in the development plan. And other thing is that the tributaries or the river which is there on the passing through, the adjacent areas are being carved out, the green spaces are created through TP schemes. This is amusement park created in Surat on 625 hectares of land. Another forthcoming is land consolidation for almost 100 hectares for Central Core Area Educational Hub in Baroda. Then, if we are looking for smart cities, this is a past story. Now smart cities have come further. So what shall we do it? We are looking, I mean, till date, what I could understand in our planning principles also, that we are only looking for land. The legislation, the regime is only for the land consolidation, but we need to look in for built environment. Seamless spaces. Then our regulations or development control regulations or the regime is controls land use, some control on the land FSI built up area densities. Should we not go in for a regime of three-dimensional built forms? Should we not have additions of sustainability, energy efficiency in our legislation and regimes? I mean, these are the points which we need to, we are also looking forward in the state, our state. Then one, I mean, this is my personal view, land is considered to be asset for land monetization, but it has to be looked further in terms of providing our spaces for the social infrastructure. What has happened in Gujarat also over a period of time since the introduction of land for sale clause was introduced in the act, then most of the development authorities are, this is an easy way of earning money. That's why they are trying to reduce the spaces for other infrastructure. I mean, that's where we need to bring in, consider land as an asset for creating infrastructure, not just for monetization. Now, infrastructure today also, we need to look into some inclusivity in, and not just utility. And lastly, at least in Gujarat, we face problems of land disposal. More and more land with public land disposal is a problem. We should look into development through PPP models, not just disposal or selling of the land and creating this, assets. That's where I end up my hope. If there are any issues, so we can discuss.
We now have Dr. Reshmi Nair, who is the chairperson of the Center of Excellence in Management of Land Acquisition, Resettlement and Rehabilitation at ASCI in Hyderabad. She'll talk about the changed legislative environment at the national level on this, and will also highlight something about the new capital for Andhra Pradesh, Amravati, how they've managed to get 98% of their land in such a short period of time.
Distinguished chairperson, panelists, and very distinguished participants. I think 10 minutes time is too short, and I'm sure he would stop me before that, because probably we are exceeding the timeline. The issue that I would be trying to address or give a few suggestions is on how do we address land issues for the smart cities. Now, I think in the next 2 days, and probably today, we'll be hearing a lot of two terms, which is smart and efficient. And the other aspect which Rajit mentioned was equity, which is where I would be emphasizing a little more. We have been doing a lot of work on the present Land Acquisition Act, which is much misunderstood, and I'm really sad and unfortunate that the discussions that is presently happening is nothing relating to the provisions of the Act. So I hope a lot of questions do come on that, which again is not the mandate given to me today. But I would rather speak on what I have been observing on the ground, the changes that I have been observing on the ground. And also, we have a different legislative framework today. We don't have Land Acquisition Act 1894 to fall back on. So all the town planning schemes that we are talking about, be it the Naya Raipur, in fact, we had a workshop in ASCI before we decided on how to proceed with the capital city land pooling system in Andhra Pradesh. And Bajaj Saab was there discussing his model. So what I believe is in the coming days, whatever town planning systems we have across, be it Gujarat, be it Haryana, be it Mohali, be it Raipur, would also have to look at the new land acquisition, the legislative framework that we have today. Before I discuss much of it, I think I will not go into all the slides, but I try to look at land conflicts across the country and to have some classification or typology of what kind of land is being, what are the conflicts, why are the conflicts arising? Can we categorize them into more of private sector, or can we categorize them into more of land being acquired in terms of quantum? Seriously, I couldn't really do it. I couldn't make that classification because I thought government projects, small projects, large projects, all projects, a lot of projects, there are a lot of conflicts happening. So why are these happening? In fact, I would give two examples. One which I recently went to one extreme border area of our country, a place in Himachal Pradesh called Lahaul Spiti. When I went to this place, we had a public hearing in which I was asked questions like, and this is something which you don't expect going to a very small village in a countryside, and they asked me questions like, what is development? This is something which we believe, is in the academic debate. But sadly, no. Wherever you go, today people are asking these questions. And what do you mean by development? Is it development for me as well? So this is something which we have been seeing across, and I believe would be asked in the days to come, even if we talk about smart city. We have to understand probably also that the development that we have been following has left a lot of people behind. So if we talk about national sacrifice and a lot of development from a larger perspective, there's a fair majority who don't really believe in that unless you talk about specific benefits going to them. So in the background, I think why this is happening is because India still has about half of our population whose livelihood is dependent on agriculture, though the contribution of agriculture sector has declined to less than 15% to the country's national income. We still have about 1/3 of our people who are classified under the official poverty line, which again is a big debate on how do we really classify them. So we have left a fair amount of people less, below, or not really touched by the so-called high growth rate. We have a fair amount of issues which also try to be, we need to be addressing them as we go about the development path. Lot of slides in my presentation which gives facts and figures of what I'm trying to say. And I would actually try and relate this with the development that has happened in 2013, for which we are now being talked about. We have a new land acquisition law. It is termed as Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, which has repealed the Land Acquisition Act 1894. It brings in a fair amount of changes, and I believe, very strongly believe, that this Land Acquisition Act came as a potential solution to a lot of things that we were facing on the ground. Sadly, now it is being talked about as a potential difficult element to actually pursue development. So I think we need to have a balance there. And why we need to have a balance? I think I'll little more elaborate. Probably I have 5 minutes left. Okay, so another point, I think, talked about inclusive, we keep talking about inclusive growth, but sadly that hasn't happened, part of which I have explained, and part of which we are really looking at a huge issue is the amount of employment that we have to generate, and that is actually scary if you see 44 million people in the next 2015 to 2020, and it is more scary if you see that when India was growing at the highest growth rate, we had just 27 million additional jobs created. So when we talk about development, these are aspects which are going to be disputed. These are aspects which have to be taken care of. And we have had a very disastrous resettlement policy in the past. I'm glad that both the models that we have talked about has talked about giving a fair amount to the farmer, which was not the case before. Before I actually talk about a little about the land pooling mechanism in Andhra Pradesh, which has tried to build in a few more elements from taking the good practices from them. Before that, just a minute into something which was an eye-opener for me and which equally applies to India. There was this debate which was happening, and the Chinese, they have actually had a disastrous resettlement policy in the past, especially in reservoir projects. China is one country which has built huge dams and huge displacement. So in 2007, they come out with a very progressive policy. And I give an example of China. They said, don't speak about China because China is not a democracy. Their land system is different. And I say it has more lessons for us, because when I asked, why did you change this? And the progressive policy not only talks about a high gross compensation, it talks about an income which grows to a farmer about 20 years after the land is acquired. And this income is broadly an income which doesn't allow a family to actually fall below the poverty line. At that time, it was about 600 yuan. And when I asked, why did China, where land is actually not owned by an individual, but by the rural communes in the village, really come out with this progressive policy, what they said was, in 2000, mid-2000, they did a survey, and what came out was 1/3 of the hardcore poor in China are people who have been displaced because of development projects. So when you talk about infrastructure and development, we have to get people along, unless, other than, if you don't do that, when we are creating more issues for our country, which has a fair amount of these issues already. So I think that's the background in which we have to work. That's the background, and we are left with no choice, believe me. I would come to this in the next slide. So in the existing legislative framework, the one which has been repealed, the act has been repealed, and from 1st of January 2014, we have a new act, which is now being amended, and we have an ordinance too, basically not only protects the landowner, it also protects the livelihood losers with much greater benefits. We have a rehabilitation package which talks about an employment or a 5 lakh or an annuity component, not just to the land losers, but everybody whose livelihood is dependent. And this is a huge issue in India, where 15 to 30% people are tenants who do not have an official record as a landowner. So we are looking at those aspects. Secondly, it talks about consultancy, transparency, and consent to reduce conflicts. Now, conflicts are already there. How do we reduce it? Part of it is already explained by the two eminent speakers in terms of how they consulted. It is beyond the framework. It is something which is now being asked to do. I mean, the legislation provides for it. Secondly, it also talks about utilization of excess land available. Don't acquire fresh land if you have land already. He also talks about, the acquisition law talks about also land lease. It talks about urbanization projects sharing a portion of developed land, and it also prevents excess land acquisition, more displacement than warranted, acquisition of land in scheduled area with tribals who have borne a disproportionate brunt of displacement. We keep talking about these estimates of 60 million people displaced and 40% being tribals. So we say that should be a demonstrable last resort, and acquisition of multi-crop irrigated land is also to be avoided. Now, these are conditions which would be taken care prior to go ahead with the acquisition procedure. That's where we talk about social impact assessment and restriction and all those things. Now, do we really have a choice? I don't think we really have a choice, because this is even if you're not sensitized, there are people who are already sensitized who are asking you questions when you go to the ground. And if you're not, we have a civil society who is growing at a larger growth rate than the Indian economy. I think they grew at 10% when the Indian economy was going at 8.3%. So the awareness levels are high. And I believe a lot of things also goes to the contradictory role of the political parties and the debate that we have in the parliament today. So a lot of awareness is being there on the ground, and the conflicts also happen because they receive a fair amount of support from the political parties. Now, that is the reason why I say land conflicts have to be managed, whichever schema you are going to follow in the future, be it planning scheme or land acquisition procedure. Now, coming back to Andhra Pradesh model, for every acre, what are the new changes beyond what was discussed in the town planning schemes, which we have adopted from the other states, beyond redistribution of plots to the farmers in a certain way, in a proportion which is given in my slide, which is slightly more for irrigated land, a slightly less for dry land. You're also talking about giving an annuity to a farmer for a period of 10 years so that he has the cushion of saying that, well, even with a commercial and a residential plot, what if nothing clicks? So you have an annuity scheme to fall back on, which is about 50,000 and 30,000. 50,000, which is the annual payment, pension. There is an annuity scheme of 3,000, 30,000 and 50,000. There is a yearly increase. And more importantly, this is something which I wanted to emphasize on, when they went actually for acquiring land, And Andhra Pradesh, out of 36,000 acres of land, they have already acquired 32,000, and it's in a fairly quick time. The important question people asked, and which we also took by, in ASCII, what happens with the new legislative framework, which does not only empower the landowners, it also gives a fair package to the landless people who are working there. So in the policy which was adopted for the capital city, they say a pension of 2,000 rupees, 2,500 rupees per month per family for a period of 10 years to all landless families. So you're not just talking about compensation, to get a wider acceptance of the package to among all the people. This is something else which has been tried. And then there are other very, very progressive measures are saying house to houseless people. I'm sure some of these are already there. Interest-free loan of 25 lakh to all poor families, free education, medical facilities, and a lot of things, and skill development, looking at the kind of jobs that are going to be created. So I would conclude my presentation with these questions, and there are many, many more, but considering the timeline that we have, and I have to stop here, I think for any model that we have follow, be it the acquisition mode, we cannot expect an easy way out unless we reach out to people, because now the law actually empowers them. And also look at other aspects which we have not been seeing, because the law also now empowers them with a package which is beyond just looking at landowners. Some of these questions are is the land which is proposed to be pooled or acquired the minimum, has irrigated land, where which is a lot of conflict is because you are taking multi-crop irrigated land. Can we avoid them to the extent possible? We did acquire them. 8,000 of 36,000 is a multi-crop irrigated land. What will be the loss to the existing landowners and other livelihood? Let us, talking about development to people, unless it really benefits them, is really not going to make any sense. You're talking about smart city, but what are they going to get is something which is very important, and you have to address them, in fact, if you are looking at getting land. So that's one thing. And how will people who are displaced be relocated by the government? What are the skills of the population? We keep talking about employment, but what are the skills are available? What are the employment opportunities that would be developed that would be generated, which is where the gap always lies. And I have seen this across the projects that I visit. This is the most dissatisfying thing, that you are giving land, hoping for an employment, and it just doesn't materialize. So this is something which you have to look at. And does the land pooling incorporate equity criterion? This is, I don't know, maybe in the question and answer session we can have, but how do you have the reconstitution of plots? I think Bhuj is one in Gujarat. You actually made use of that. So that is also one prominent aspect you have to consider in the Indian case. In terms of reconstitution, it may not be just very similar to across all the categories. And finally, can we really look at some innovative models of benefit sharing, which is what I'm very happy the chief guest of the conference talked about. I really left it out because I thought it is theoretical speaking about that here, but I was energized and encouraged by his statement that we need to make them a permanent stakeholder. I have seen it happening in hydro projects. Maybe I shared with you the Himachal Pradesh experience, but not in urban case. But if we can do that, then we bring them, we reduce land conflicts, and I believe that's the best way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have Mr. Rajan Athalya. He is the Vice President of Kalpataru Limited and has worked in the field of real estate for over 4 decades. He will shift from greenfield areas to Bombay, which is already built up, and really present to us various mechanisms by which you can assemble land in a city like Bombay.
Thank you. Dignitaries on the dais and friends, since I am going to share my experience, I do not have any PowerPoint presentation. So I have about 40 years of experience. About 20 years I worked in municipal corporation. The first development plan of Mumbai was prepared in 1965-67. Its implementation is only to the extent of 7%. Because when the land is reserved and owner gets a very meager compensation as compared to those days' rates, so he loses the interest in the land. The land gets encroached. And once when corporation goes for acquiring these kinds of land for public purposes, the encroachers are supposed to give alternative accommodation. Though under the Act it is not mandatory. But corporation on humanitarian grounds gives them alternative accommodation. So if we are going to spend 100 rupees for acquiring the land, 46 rupees are going in rehabilitation. So once when we have realized this, in 84-85 plan, where I was very closely associated and I have prepared the development plan and DC rules at that time, we have introduced the concept of transferable development right and accommodation reservation. And now those concepts have been accepted all over India now, and it was first started by us in Mumbai. Because the problems of Mumbai are very unique. It is totally developer-dominated industry, and developers are fighting for every square foot of land. Here we are talking in terms of acres and other things, but Bombay's experience is very different. Now, what is transferable development right? Here what happens if the owner of the land definitely physically loses the land, but materially he doesn't lose. Suppose his land is 1,000 square meter and his land is reserved for garden. If he hands over the 1,000 square meter of land, we give him a development right certificate, like a share certificate, and ask him either you use it for your other plot somewhere else or sell it in an open market to different developers. So materially he gets the FSI potential of his land. So this transferable development right concept has been come in the then development plan in 91 and 92. There was one more concept we have introduced, that is called accommodation reservation. Take the example of market. Suppose we have earmarked one plot for market, which is we acquired and we develop. Then we realize that either the market will be fish market, vegetable market, or maybe combination of both. But when it doesn't get patronized on upper floors, because nobody goes to purchase the vegetable for first or second floor. So the first, second, third floor potential becomes useless for market. So what we have realized, that if some owner gives us only part portion of the built-up area free of cost, say for example dispensary, library, or market, then we ask him that you give this land free of cost to us in a built-up accommodation form. We do not reduce it from your FSI potential of the plot, and you get full potential of the FSI. By this way, about 400 to 500 built-up amenities have come to the municipal corporation. So if you will review the old development plan of 91-2011, it has been implemented to the extent of 33%. But even then, I'm not happy, because after seeing my experience now, I was advisor to the development plan which has been published, the third development plan by Mumbai in last month, which is under ScanEra, under heavy criticism by all the press and general public at large. So what is happening, that even if these 300, 400 accommodation reservations are coming to Mumbai or coming to the planning authority, but I know at least 40, 50 buildings have been kept as it is. There is no security, the compound wall has been broken, people have taken out the window frame, and those reservations are not put to use. So this is a very sorry state of affair. So what I personally feel, that though the development plan is being implemented, I am going one step ahead, whether the local body is well equipped to use these amenities, because the Bombay Municipal Corporation do not have a ready-made policy at that time, whether this land is to be given to some NGOs or to some charitable trust for use. Now the Land Acquisition Act has been modified. So now, instead of giving TDR 1, we have decided to give TDR twice. Unfortunately, fortunately, FSI is a very important tool to implement the proposals in development plan. But I think the role of government as a facilitator has gone much beyond that. Sometimes they feel that if I give FSI, we can get so many things done. Our revenue minister in his budgetary session said, if I am giving so much FSI to so much area, my revenue is increasing to so many percentage. So FSI should not be used, or rather misused. One of the developer has given an offer to the corporation that I will make your road as concrete road, give me additional TDR. Tomorrow somebody will come and go that I will donate so many medicine to your hospital, give me TDR. So whether we are going back to the barter system. So this was not expected when we prepared the development plan. Now in this recent development plan which is published last month, we have again made a built-in mechanism in the development control regulation, that for every development of 2,000 square meter of plot, you have to give 10% land to municipal corporation and 10% built-up area in the form of small tenement, which they will use it for project affected person. So this is what about the implementation of the development plan. Now I am supposed to talk something on the brownfield schemes. So brownfield schemes in Mumbai, particularly in the island cities, are not giving good responses because there are, in B and C ward, I do not know how many of you are aware of Bombay, Bhuleshwar, Kalba Devi, Baikala are the maximum dense populated area where the plot size varies from 150 to 250. And there the pencil type of building have come up, 30-story, 40-story. So to avoid this kind of development, planners thought that we will take urban renewal scheme. So we are asking 4, 5, 6, 7 owners come together, form a sizable plot of at least 4,000 square meter or 1 acre, and then we will have proper parking, we will have garden, we will have layout roads, and we will have all these basic amenities to those development. But so far that development is not encouraging very much. Similarly, we have about 33 TP schemes. Out of these 33 TP schemes, only 2 in island city are not being properly implemented. Otherwise, the rest of the 31 TP schemes are very well implemented. But those are also very implemented because at that time, those lands were virgin. These were greenfield lands. For a brownfield land, to make a TP scheme is a suicidal mistake. Now, coming back to the redevelopment in suburb. What happened that in suburban area, when there is no much interference from the government have issued only one directive, that the Registrar of Cooperative Housing Society comes to your society, he attend the general body meetings, take the videograph, ask every individual member whether you have been forced or voluntarily you have agreed to redevelopment, and whether you have selected the developer by proper bidding and tendering systems. So these kinds of developments are working very well. So I think if you have any questions, probably in the question answer session, we will try to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Gaurav Wahi. Mr. Wahi is the Senior Vice President for the Jones Lang LaSalle Property Consultants, and he also has several years of professional experience in the real estate sector, more than 15 years. He will bring in the private sector perspective into the whole issue of land management.
Esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard so many interesting things about land pooling, bringing in land as a resource in greenfield and brownfield retrofitting development scenarios. What I'm going to speak about here is regarding the private perspective from for the development of this infrastructure or new greenfield initiatives. Urbanization and increased pressure on land is a reality. We will have doubled the urban population in the next 25, 30 years. So there is an appreciated need in developed countries to have counter-growth centers and new cities, and even to build retrofitted infra in our existing cities to have equitable living standards. In this context, the Smart City initiative by government is a very ambitious and positive step towards this direction. Now, whether it is a greenfield initiative or a brownfield initiative, the basic ingredient which is required is land. Various approaches have been adopted, and as we saw during the course of the presentations, they have enjoyed varied degrees of success, be it large land acquisition through older Land Acquisition Act, or the present format of land acquisition, which I agree with my fellow panelists, champions the cause of the marginalized section, however, bringing in some of the deterrents for private participation in terms of larger timelines, larger consensus building initiatives which have to be undertaken. But nevertheless, the landowners have to be inclusive in this participatory growth which has to come in the Smart City initiative or building another 100 new cities. The fact is that these new cities or counter-growth centers or the brownfield initiatives would not all be in tier 1 towns with this very high demand-supply gap, where there's very high real estate dynamics. So all of them would have to have different approach of tackling land procurement, pooling, acquisition, retrofitting. There'll have to be various different approaches. There will not be one uniform approach to land management for this initiative. Now, the key concerns when it comes to larger land acquisition are concerns in delays of acquisition, concerns in costs of acquisition, concerns in the present format creating consent for that acquisition. And that eventually leads to a lot of delays, additional cost, in terms of escalation, viability, financial viability of the propositions on ground. When we come to, at the same time, I would like to mention that yes, it is evident that private sector functions with economy-driven motive and has limited areas of operation where there's latent real estate demand, economic employment opportunities. It caters to primarily the middle and upper sections of the society, which have, and the government is left to regulate equitable infra to across the sections of the society and provide housing, stock, and infrastructure services to the balanced segments of the society. It is demand-driven and cannot serve the whole strata of the society and has a limited geographic reach. That is why I mentioned that it will have to be different approaches when dealing with different particular regions, geographical regions in the country. For brownfield initiatives as well, there are various successful approaches, as have been explained. There is voluntary land pooling because of economic incentive and the dynamics prevailing within a catchment. States have exercised and practiced this successfully. It is even being something which is in Delhi now going to come into fore. Compulsory land adjustment to implement infrastructure projects wherein owners get a certain amount of land. There are certain incentives to the landowners. There are certain incentives to the society at large because of the upgraded infrastructure. Guided land development, TDR, accommodation reservation, many of these aspects have been talked of. However, the key concern to note from the landowner perspective and even the private developer perspective are the facts that all of these depend on the size of the landholding, which is there in a particular catchment which needs to be pooled, the compensation or the incentive in redevelopment with the private partner and the landowner, which is there in these catchments. If they are very, very dynamic catchments, there'll be a lot of interest because there's financial feasibility for all stakeholders concerned. But however, if it is not a very dynamic catchment, it is that the infra would be in place. However, those redevelopments which we envisage do not come into place. Second key important aspect is that the government needs to deliver that infrastructure for the premium to be come downstream to the occupants, which sometimes is inordinately delayed because of various reasons of consensus forming between the key stakeholders at various stages. Also, once the infrastructure is in place and the redevelopment has to be done, there are multidisciplinary approvals which have to be taken place and take place for development, and there's a lengthy process of approvals. Now, for each development, whether it is greenfield or brownfield, there are three critical risks which is assessed by a private sector player. The first and foremost is the market risk. The economic magnets within a particular catchment, the demand and supply for the real estate which they are going to develop, the financial feasibility of the proposition in terms of whether a business proposition would make financial returns for the developer to redevelop or develop a greenfield initiative. Second would be from the development risk, the cost of acquisition, the cost of consensus, the delays in forming the consensus, giving due credit to the fact that landowners should have a participative role in the development and should reap the economic benefits. However, the length of the process, if is long and delayed, it automatically impacts the financial feasibility of these projects. So both have to be taken into account jointly to form feasible projects for future development. And third is the operational risk. Operational risk, I mean regulatory and policy, wherein because these are large mandate projects which are going to run for a long time, probably 10 years or more, there has to be a stability in the policy. There shouldn't be abrupt changes in the policy. There should be security of contract for private players, because that really boosts the confidence of private sector for investments in these particular initiatives. With such large investments being planned, and as the Honorable Minister in the inaugural session mentioned, they're looking forward to private participation. It really is imperative that the private sector participates with full enthusiasm. There are a couple of models on which the private sector can participate as mobilizers or developers for new city development on free market basis, or probably as vendors for delivering housing, infra, other amenities, commercial stock on a participatory basis. Both models would be key. However, the key for the participation for private sector would lie in, first of all, promoting economic opportunities within these new initiatives, because that really triggers the demand for other asset classes to reap premium from the whole development, apart from the other aspects, social and equity aspects associated with the city. To make it financially viable, there have to be those economic parameters, economic generators within each city. Second is efficient facilitation of land procurement. Any proposition once tied up with a particular partner who has put in equity or a stake in the project, if gets delayed beyond a period of time, it affects the feasibility of that project. So the efficient land procurement and management and facilitation of approvals is very important for success of these projects and participation of the private sector. Third is the stable regulatory and policy regime. So that is very important to boost investors' confidence, equity participants' confidence, because any abrupt changes in this, and we have seen them in quite a number of examples earlier, that really impacts the confidence of the developer, and they would then be hesitant about putting equity participations in these projects. And last but not the least is streamlining the approval process. The approval processes are too long, and they really eat into the time to get all the things together for actually placing development on site. These are just to name a few. Some of these measures, if streamlined properly, shall go a long way in getting private participation for these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Now, we don't have too much time, but we'll take 2 or 3 questions. If there anyone with questions, I would suggest let's take 3 questions, and then I'll request.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Mrityunjaya. I'm from Bangalore. I'm a software consultant. We have developed software for land acquisition and compensation disbursement and rehabilitation process. It's a very comprehensive software. We have implemented the same software in Uganda government. And currently, how the process, I think most of the companies, this is the first product we have developed and implemented in Uganda government. Same thing you would like to propose that here also. But most of the companies are in governments are following manual process. Is it how effective it is, or timeline and cost disbursement? Someone says that he has got this much. Someone says that he has got less, more. How you handle this kind of crisis in manually? If you use any software, it will be more comprehensive, and you can showcase this is what we have.
Whom are you addressing your question to?
Yeah, anyone,
Okay.
panelists.
Please.
My name is Murli. I'm from the International Development Research Center. My question is, of course, it's much larger than what you have been speaking about, but it applies to everybody. I mean, anybody can answer. We are talking about smart cities for sustainable development, and most of the speakers today, at least in this session, talk more about how to plan. One of the prerequisites, I would say, when you're talking about sustainable development, would you like to have some kind of a carrying capacity of that city? When we are developing a city, mind you, the carrying or the requirements of a city dweller as against a rural dweller is far more higher to a city dweller? And do we take that into consideration? If you encroach 100 acres of land for a city, and it really requires more than 100 acres of land for you to replenish the dwellers of the city, where is this calculation? I don't find anywhere. Thank you.
I'm Vijay Jagannathan from the World Resources Institute. There's a question for Mr. Athalye, because you were mentioning about brownfield sites as being very hard to redevelop. And then we heard from Mr. Wahi on some interesting points about risks and also on how you can come up with an institutional framework. So my question is, based on what the comments he made, what is your response to that? Because a lot of the smart city thinking today in India has been about redeveloping the brownfield sites in the big cities like Kolkata and Mumbai. And that has been the experience in a lot of the OECD countries also, that when you manage the risks well, when you put in the right policy framework, brownfield sites could be good candidates for redevelopment, for both creating jobs and bringing in new forms of urbanization.
One last question.
Hello, my name is Ravi. I am from Shakti Foundation. I have a question to Dr. Rashmi Nair. The question I always have is, on what basis the area of the city is, the new greenfield city is decided? For example, Nair Raipur had a very basic calculation that there will be 100 people per hectare or whatever, and they acquired a lot of land. But in case of the new capital for Andhra, there's not even a master plan, but still so much land is acquired, and it's kept with the government, and we don't see much development there in a lot of places. So, and what is the calculation you use to determine the area of the city?
Okay. Can I ask Mr. Athalye to first respond, because it's specific?
Sure. When I said that there is no good response to the brownfield development as far as city is concerned, in suburban area it works well. The basic difference is, in the suburban area, the land belongs to the society, and every member of the society is the owner of the land. So it is between the society members and the developer, and it's solely depending on the negotiation skills of both the parties. Generally, the negotiation skills successfully happen, then both the party gets win-win situation. But in island city, there are most of these areas are occupied by child dwellers. They are not the owners, they are the tenants. And when government is giving them the basic minimum area, that earlier it was 225 square foot carpet area, which is there now, when for the urban renewal scheme of say 4,000 square meter and above, they have increased to 300 square foot. But like in slum redevelopment, there is a maximum area to the rehabilitation can be given by any developer, which is not a rule for child kind of development or other development. So what happens, it is the right of the developer, it is the right of the child owners or the tenants to select the developer, and they start negotiating with the developer. And finally, developer is not going to give them from his pocket. If he is not being benefited, he will not give. So these are all, according to me, are the government welfare scheme for those existing occupants. And if these existing occupants have started negotiating everything, then the developers wind up the projects, government has to interfere, and the scheme goes. The another reason for,
I agree. What I said in my presentation was that if there's economic incentive for both the landowners and the developers, there would definitely be interest for redevelopment and facilitation of the infra by government. As Mr. Athalye rightly mentioned, in these schemes where it is governed by the Slum Rehabilitation Board, there are many instances where consensus between two parties are not reached, and there is not enough incentive between both the interest groups, and ultimately government has to intervene to deliver that particular project and to make sure that the interests are aligned for all the key stakeholders.
Bajaj, you want to respond to the question from there, or the comment from there?
Actually, it is mostly for the Andhra government, but for Nair Raipur, we had first prepared the master plan where we identified the workforce which is to be used in or to be settled in Naya Raipur. And based on the workforce or the work areas, we decided upon the population, and based on the population and the density, we arrived at the area of the city.
You talked about carrying capacities. Let me tell you, 1960 first development plan for Ahmedabad was prepared. That time the population was something around 6 lakhs. Today, in 2012, a new development plan is proposed. That is for 76 lakhs for Ahmedabad, and the entire Aoda area, it's to the extent of 105 lakhs, 1.05. The areas which we planned for TP schemes, which we planned in 1930, that was one FSI was there. Density was 50 persons per hectare. Today, the density what is there is something around 300 persons per hectare. Now, you rightly said carrying capacities should be dealt in. For greenfield areas, there are no such parameters which you can have it. Yes, to introduce high densities, like transit-oriented development concept is adopted, where we are going to give FSI to the extent of 5, 5.4, and maybe further 6 also. For that, we have brought in the new provision of local area plans, where its primary deals in with retrofitting of that area. Therein, we will be experimenting the carrying capacities and how to deal in with. Because I'll tell the story of Surat. The growth rate in last decade of Surat is 67%. I mean, you can imagine we just cannot deal in with carrying capacities, mathematical models for in one time. It's dynamic in nature. Every time you need to, but you need to have a tool. Now in 2014, we brought in a tool of local area plan, which will perhaps address this issue in future. Yeah, thank you.
1 minute, okay. I think I'll quickly reply to the first question. And before, in terms of a software, I think there is some use of IT skill, IT in various departments as of now. But I think the software is much more required to monitor R&R. I think Andhra Pradesh tried out with that, where every stakeholder is able to actually look at the stage of the R&R or LA process. That can really help. Did not really help, you know, the mechanism, the tool that they had developed had practical issues, but I believe now is being developed across. So it's not LA just R&R, but it is more of a monitoring mechanism, and the software that you develop can be a real help on the ground. The second is, I think I'm not the right person to actually answer, because unlike them, I'm more of from the academic institute, and though we had this debate, we had our own take on how much land should actually be acquired or pooled by the state government. We had our own reservations to this, but I believe they had a very grand idea of how the capital city should look like. So in terms of that, they have gone ahead, but in our own take, I think it has an important implication on the valuation of land also, because unlike them, Andhra Pradesh is just giving reconstituted plots, doesn't give compensation. So the entire package to the landowner depends on the valuation that the land is going to see, you know, in the coming days. And I think it has an inverse relation with the amount of land that you're acquiring. So I would not pinpoint the reason, though I think it is a larger, which probably the government would be in a better position.
Well, just one final comment before ending this session. We are really running out of time. But a lot of the discussion has revolved around how do you pool the land together for whatever you want to make. I think smart land management has one other aspect. How efficiently do you use the land that you've already got? I think that aspect has really not been covered in much, except Mr. Sharma mentioned these aspects of TOD and densification. That's what I'm looking at in terms of how efficiently do you manage the land that you have. Two broad principles that everyone knows, but one is compact cities and mixed-use planning. I think these are the two ideas that are floating around the world. If you want to be smart in the use of resources, you want to be smart in how efficiently you use whatever you have, look at compact cities, look at mixed-use planning, and that would be the other aspect of smart land management. Let me end with that. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks to the, yes, thank you very much.